Essentially, the Hacker Foundation is a 501c3, which is a nonprofit in the United States that allows for hacker projects to take on a charitable status. So if you run a penetration testing company, for example, you could donate money to the Hacker Foundation, and we give it to Metasploit. And they take this money, exactly what you donate to them, and we provide them with infrastructure, and you get a nice tax-deductible write-off. In addition, we help with other types of projects, and depending on what you want to do, we might be able to help you. Though since almost everyone in this room is European, it might not be so applicable. It could be useful to take this model and do it in Europe, and possibly there are other places that are already doing it this way. And Nick Farr is an old friend of mine, known from DEF CON, and DEF CON is sort of where the Hacker Foundation grew out of, and a lot of the other people that are involved with that are also involved with the Hacker Foundation. So without further ado, this is Nick Farr.
Thanks again, Jake. I'm Nick Farr, and I'm here to talk about the Hacker Foundation. Just to give a little brief introduction about myself, my undergraduate degree is in social science, and while I was at the University of Michigan, a lot of the tools and things that we were learning in our social science, actually, I'm sorry, I want to have a timer so I don't go too over on my slides. I did some research on just hacker culture and the sociology of hacker culture. While I was there and while I was involved in Ann Arbor 2600, the University of Michigan is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I also did a little bit of research into human-computer interaction at the School of Information there. And I just recently received my MBA from Grand Valley State University, where I'm also a graduate assistant. I just wanted to say quickly that most of what I'm talking about today is my own opinion and my own speech. It's not to be taken or construed, unless otherwise noted, as the official position of the Hacker Foundation. And the reason I'm wearing this suit is because it makes it very easy for you to find me, because I have not yet found anybody else who's in a full-blown suit and tie. So that's just to explain that. Most of the hacker t-shirts that I receive as gifts or that I buy at conferences like this, I end up giving away at a convention in the Midwest called Nauticon, which happens in the spring every year. Also, the Hacker Foundation has provided no funding for me to attend the conference. I've used personal funds to buy my plane ticket here and other incidental expenses, except for, obviously, the CCC, who gave me free admission to the Congress, and I'm very grateful for that. To B9, who threw a fantastic party last night. It was so great. I was up until 6 o'clock in the morning. I thought, if I try to sleep, it's not going to be good. And I also want to say, Germans know how to do caffeine. I've been living on this stuff. It's great. I also want to thank my personal friend, Josh Landau, who lent me an unlocked GSM cell phone. I did purchase a SIM for it with Hacker Foundation money, and that's the only money that's been used, and that's basically to facilitate contact between you and me. And I also want to thank Jesse, who's given some of his own personal funds to make it so that I could attend the Congress. And I want to thank my fiancée, who is allowing me to be here right now. Just to give a quick outline, this was in the program for the Congress. The first thing I want to talk about is just sort of where Hacker Foundation came from. Second thing I want to talk about, which I think is really important, is how the Hacker Foundation came into being as a legal entity in the United States. Part 3 is sort of what we've done since then, and then what I really want to do towards the end of it, I want to try to breeze through this to allow some communication just to open up the lines between you and me. Also, I know that a lot of people in the audience are not native English speakers, so if I'm speaking unintelligibly, or if there's a word you don't understand, or I'm just going too fast because I'm shaking because I've had, I think, 6 of these today, just yell out something like slow down or speak up, whatever. The Hacker Foundation really sort of started, the earliest pinpointed origin is at DEF CON 9, where Jesse Krems, who's the head speaker goon, had been the head speaker goon at DEF CON for a long time, just sort of saw my HCI talk that I gave at DEF CON 9, and we got to talking a little bit about, wouldn't it be great if we had a Hackers Without Borders, sort of a Médecins Sans Frontières for hackers. And just along those lines, we were talking about what can hackers do to provide disaster relief? How can we provide communications to NGOs that might not be good at doing that in a foreign land where there isn't existing communications infrastructure? And then, one of my favorite memories of Pac Bell is when after DEF CON 9 was over, we had just a sat phone lying around from Uncle Ira. So we went up to the roof of the Alexis Park and we started playing with it. And that those sort of things sort of got the Hacker Foundation ball sort of rolling. We didn't really do much between DEF CON 9 and 10, but at DEF CON 10, we all met at a pizza parlor on day 0 of DEF CON 10. And a whole bunch of people were there. A lot of ideas were discussed. I was furiously taking notes on everything. One of the ideas that came out of that I think is a good idea and that I'd still like to implement somehow, but for various legal and organizational reasons we haven't found the right way to do it, is a hacker benevolent society. The idea being it's sort of like an insurance plan that people will pay in something like $10 a year. And if they're ever down on their luck, they've lost their job, they can't get a new one for a year, and they need something like a new suit to go on interviews because their old one's trashed, or they need a new laptop or something like that. Those funds that everybody contributes into can be used to purchase those sorts of things to get, help hackers who are in need get back on their feet. And a lot of other ideas were discussed about what should be done. And Priest, who's sort of the head MC of DEF CON, has been for a while, basically said at the end of it, capped everything off by saying, you have to get organized. You have to actually go out, do the legal research, talk with the government, and actually, start an organization. And, part 2, that's what happened. Hacker Foundation is a nonprofit organization registered in the state of California. Corporations in the United States have to be registered with their state. And then once they get state registration, they then go apply for their various federal exemptions, or they elect certain things. And we submitted the application to the state of California something in July of 2003. And it took till December for them to say, okay, yeah, this looks fine, you're good. It was Jesse and I who put our names on the application for the California Corporation and on the IRS application. Later on, we realized that we needed to have a board of directors because 2 people can't run a foundation that's supposed to represent hackers. So right now, our board of directors is international. We have a board member who lives in the United Kingdom. We have board members who are on the East Coast, West Coast, in New England, and in the Midwest. I live in Grand Rapids, which is 3 hours away from Chicago, and 2 of our board members are in Chicago. After we got approval from the state of California, Jesse and I started working on the application for 501c3 status, which is basic charity. 501c3s can't do political activism. They're not a religious organization. They're the standard charitable status for organizations in the United States. And I flew out to Vermont, where Jesse lives, and we were sitting there. We were doing the application, running the numbers, trying to explain, what the Hacker Foundation was doing. And so, of course, the IRS writes us back and says, no. So, some of the questions that they ask are, well, this Hacker Foundation idea sounds a little bit sketchy. I mean, why do hackers need a foundation? What are you doing as far as educational and research activities? That a lot of the stuff we were describing in the eyes of the IRS looked like for-profit activities, which obviously a charity can't engage in as their sole purpose. And so they asked us to explain, well, what do you mean by nonprofit educational activities? How are you not going to make a profit from this? One of the sticking points they had is, what do you mean by the free flow of information? And in doing the research for the response, when you say free flow of information, that has certain political connotations to it. And as a 501c3, you can't really engage in certain kinds of political action, that the language is sort of vague right there. So they wanted us to clarify that. Another thing they said, but sort of between the lines, is how is this different from a .com? Are you just doing this to basically escape your taxation obligations in the United States? And if you make a profit from whatever things you're going to be doing, how are those going to be used? And yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. The IRS is the the Internal Revenue Service. They're the federal taxation authority in the United States. So they do taxes for the entire country of the United States. Most people in the United States pay taxes in 2 ways based on their income. They pay a portion of it to their state in most states, and then they pay a larger portion of that to the federal government for defense and roads and other evil things. Wars, exactly. God, I hope they're not watching the speech. And so what I tried to phrase the response back to the IRS is saying, and I didn't use the language hacker ethic, but if you were to read the PDF both from the IRS and our response to them, which I have available if anybody wants, a lot of what I was saying was right in the line with what you would look at as the hacker ethic as embodied in the Hacker Manifesto. What we were saying is that there is a role for a charity to create, sort of technical solutions, sort of hacks to help people in need in a lot of different ways. A couple of the theoretical projects that I mentioned that the Hacker Foundation might want to do, one was called Opsomidriro. Basically what it was is using toy technology to create mine-detecting robots that were built in a way so that when they actually detect a mine, they would go over it, and then the impact of the mine would be absorbed, the body of it would blow apart into various different bits, but they'd all be tethered together so that somebody out in the field could basically scoop up the robot, put it back together, and then send it out to go find another mine. Another project that we were doing that other people are in the United States have done since then is taking old cellular phones that can dial emergency services and then taking them to elderly who don't get out of their house very much, who might have trouble summoning assistance, and then teaching them how to use these cell phones to dial for help so that they don't have to pay a private provider to provide a basically identical service. One of the big emphases that I wanted to point out with this was that all of these solutions that we were advocating would be essentially free to the user. They would rely primarily on donated technology, donated expertise, donated volunteer time for training and things like that, and provide these services to people at no charge. It's something that, trying to find services that people were getting charged for, that we could come in with the open source or free technology to try to find a way to reduce that cost to the end user. When I tried to explain free flow of information to the IRS, I tried to phrase it in the least political terms possible. That what we said was all we were trying to do is create open channels for people to do something with. And whatever people ended up doing with them was of their own choice. If people wanted access to a blog, they could talk about their boring life, they could talk about communism, they could talk about how George Bush is great. The Hacker Foundation would have nothing to do with it. All we were trying to do is open that channel. And some of the examples I gave, were establishing free nets, tin can networks that piggyback off of freely provided internet services in the United States, the cell phone example I gave, and just general open source advocacy. Telling people that they don't need to go out and buy a copy of Microsoft Office to write letters to their grandchildren or to balance their checkbook, that they can use OpenOffice, which I'm using to give this presentation right now. The whole mean about free flow of information was the classical GNU definition, free speech, not free beer. Another thing that I tried to hit on in my response to the IRS was that anything that we developed, or anything that a project that HF sponsored developed, or anything like that, had to be open for public use, had to be open in the most classical way possible. That any patents or research that might be developed by HF or by an HF project would be held so that other people couldn't patent it and profit off of it. Another thing that's very important that hacker groups in the United States, as opposed to Germany, have a big problem with is being sustainable. Just like when we started the Hacker Foundation, we had unrealistic goals of trying to be this transnational communications special ops team. That wasn't going to happen overnight. That wasn't realistic. It wasn't a sustainable model. So what we tried to do is we tried to say to projects who apply to us, you have to have something that's more realistic, something that's well within your grasp to do. You have to have achievable timetables, and it has to be developed in an environment that invites collaboration as opposed to stifles it. Am I going too fast, or does anybody have any questions so far, anything? Okay. A couple of the projects that HF has been involved in so far, which failed by our own standards. The first one that I really like to point out is Survivorlocationassistance.org. This project emerged in the wake of the tsunamis. And what we were trying to do is provide a way for NGOs and other people to have a central repository for identifying survivors and allowing relatives, loved ones of those survivors to basically know that they were okay. The technology was developed incredibly quickly. It was incredibly effective, we thought, and it was designed to be. The only problem was, in the wake of a big, huge natural disaster, IP is kind of hard to get, and we didn't really realize that. And as we were designing it, we thought that, that last mile problem was something that we could easily solve, and found out when we got to that point that it wasn't, that NGOs didn't have easy access to IP or anything like that in those regions, and that was something that we had to work on. Another project which is slightly more successful is Laptops for East Africa. A friend of mine from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I live, was working for a Ugandan relief organization. He said, why doesn't the Hacker Foundation collect used laptops that are still perfectly usable and give them to me to take to Uganda to show people how to use portable, more low power drain technology to automate a lot of the things that they're doing. The paper in an environment like that in East Africa gets corroded much more easily than well-isolated technology. Things also get lost, or fires or water will destroy fire cabinets, whereas you can better protect something that's a laptop when you go home at night and more effectively use information that way. And that project more or less died because of political problems in Uganda. Museveni, who's the president, more or less, I'll just leave it at that, he's the head of state of Uganda, decided that he wanted to change the constitution to allow him to be the head of state of Uganda indefinitely. And a couple of aid workers from, I believe, the Red Cross were sort of engaged with the group that was in the opposition and were shot in the middle of the night, presumably by the Ugandan authorities. And after that happened, almost all of the aid projects in Uganda left, and Jim was basically ordered to leave along with everybody else like that. In our area and in a lot of areas, there's a lot of competition for laptop donations, that laptops in computer recycling are sort of considered gold because they're the easiest things to donate, the easiest things for people to use, and that sort of thing. The other problem is that a lot of the laptops we were getting were just unusable. They were unrepairable, and then once we've accepted things like that, most of the laws in the United States say that once you've accepted it, you're responsible for responsibly recycling it, and we didn't have the wherewithal to be able to do that in a cost-effective manner yet. We're trying to work on that. Another project we had was with the North Boys and Girls Club of Chicago. It's sort of an urban refuge for youth out in Chicago. They had a brilliant technology lab that was state-of-the-art about 4 years ago that was donated by a corporate executive who used to go as a child to the North Boys and Girls Club. But unfortunately, he donated all the technology and sort of left it there. And there were some guys from Chicago 2600 who were involved in trying to, keep on using this, but what they kept on saying is, in our IT professions, we use professional grade equipment. We just don't have that here. The kids know that there's stuff out there that can do a lot of the things that they want to do, but the equipment we have is not up to that. And we need to try to find a way to get more and better equipment for that. And in the process of getting more and better equipment and getting guarantees from companies and getting sort of agreements from various different people who were stakeholders in that community, the guys from Chicago 2600 who were involved in that got bigger and better jobs that took away more and more of their time, and we sort of lost the staff on the ground there. And so that's another thing that we have to consider, that we have to try to, even from the beginning of any sort of project, develop how are we going to be sustainable in this? How are we going to make it so that if the project leaders, the real enthusiastic people leave, that we have someone there to replace them? And so just sort of to summarize things, to just sort of wrap up all of the lessons that we've learned, code, collaborative development projects like Metasploit, things like that, are very easy to work on across geographical boundaries. Everything happens on the net, people have easy access to communication, people know what they're doing. Relief efforts like the kind that we were pursuing don't work as well. That there are a lot of concerns with working on the ground that you just don't address when you're working on a code or on a project with other people around the world on the internet. One of the sort of things, and this is somewhat controversial in the HF board, which is why I want to emphasize this is what I'm saying. There's a current push saying that we need a base of operations. We need people in one place who meet sort of regularly to get things going, to keep things going, a place to store equipment, a place to repair equipment, a place to collect different types of equipment and things like that. And so what we're trying to do right now is moving towards the San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of our directors are, and try to build a base of operations right there. Another thing I heavily emphasize is that we have to continue partnering with other organizations. In some parts of the hacker community in the United States, people are very much sort of lone cowboys. They want to do it on their own. They don't want help from outside people. They don't want to work with other people. And I keep telling people in the United States, you have to go outside of your comfort zone and talk to people and say, hey, we're here. You have to talk to people like you talk to the worst tech support calls that come in, but you can't be sarcastic. You can't alienate them because they have something that you need too. Another problem with the Hacker Foundation, another reason it's sort of hard for us to get projects and lift them and keep them off the ground is because our directors are in many different geographic areas. All of our meetings happen over teleconference or IRC or things like that, and that I'm saying we really have to meet face-to-face more often. One of the things that we did at the beginning of last year is most of the directors got together in Chicago and said, okay, we have to hammer all this out into official language. And this is the first part of sort of the Hacker Foundation mission statement. After this talk, I have business cards, and all of this language is on the back of them. And I'll have just a big stack up here later on if you're interested. Unfortunately, I can't meet with anybody right after this because I'm meeting with a similar foundation here in Germany. We're reaching out to other organizations, seeing if there's a way that we could work together. But this is basically it. This is how we sort of boil down the hacker ethos into polite language that government authorities like in the United States. This, I think, is the critical part of it. Everything hinges on information sharing, and that whatever we do, anything that we're getting at is teaching people, giving people resources, showing them how to use it, enabling them, empowering them through the use of technology. And again, all the things that I mentioned here are in our mission statement. They have to be sustainable, they have to foster equality, they have to be developed in a collaborative atmosphere, they have to have that sort of hacker innovation thing that a lot of people, I think people outside of the community readily dismiss, and it has to have a charitable aim, something altruistic. One project which is successful and which is currently going on and which Jake alluded to is the Metasploit Fund. This is the sort of prototypical reason why I got involved in it. There are a lot of people and independent hacker researchers in the United States who, if they had access to grant funding or if they had access to corporate money, would be able to do a lot more things. They'd be able to develop on a lot more platforms. They'd be able to not have to work so many hours at their job and devote more of their real time to the project. Yes? Metasploit is a open source exploit development. I forgot the last term. This is why, just if you ever give a talk at a HackerCon, sleep before it. I decided not to. Framework, that's it's right there in front of me. Pardon me. I'm not drunk, really. But one of the things about the Metasploit Fund right now is that they always had a donation button on their page. A lot of open source projects will have a little PayPal donation button there. Nobody ever donates to it because there's no tangible benefit for it. I know a lot of corporations would like to donate to a lot of hacker projects or open source projects that they actually use, and if they were a marketable product, would have to pay for. But coming from a background in accountancy, if you go to the controller of your company and say, oh, hey, give these guys money through PayPal, they're going to look at you and say, no, I can't do that. They have to write a purchase order. They have to go through all this administration rigmarole. That's what the Hacker Foundation does. We deal with that. We find a way to enable the people who want to give hacker projects money a way for them to give it. We are an organization. They can donate through us, specifically targeted towards Metasploit, and be able to write that off in their taxes and be able to have it as a legitimate business expense. That corporations in the U.S. can't just write a check to an individual for doing something they did for free. It just doesn't work like that. One of the great things about Metasploit is that it gets more people involved in developing exploit code, and that it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to absolutely have a backwards and forwards knowledge of C and assembly to be able to do things. I see someone there's not liking that. It's developed collaboratively. They openly invite, I mean, some people would argue with me on that, but they try as hard as they can to continue to develop it with the mind of the people who use Metasploit and the people who help code it. It's an innovative project, and because it has no profit motive, it's an altruistic project. It's trying to go out there and show where insecurities are so that they're patched before they are exploited in malicious ways by the community. Or that's their stated aim. I was thinking, and there's been a very, very minimal talk with this at the CCC level, but somebody was asking me, okay, well, that's fine. How can you support something that's going on in Germany? Well, we could very easily create something called the Ccc Usa Support Fund. CCC has a proven track record of sustainability. They have a proven track record of trying to be as equal as possible. They foster equality, just making the gym available and taking a loss on that so that people have some place to stay during the conference is bona fide evidence of the fact that they pursue equality in action. The CCC is a great example of collaboration and working through consensus, and I think is a great model that the United States has a lot to learn from. Our community, I think the hacker community in the United States has a problem with staying power as far as organizations, that great groups will come into being, and they seem to have no more than a 5-year lifespan in most cases, especially with hackerspaces in the United States, that when you have a strong leader or the leader leaves or there becomes a fight between the upper management, the organization just dies. That I think CCC continues to innovate. I mean, this is just from what I've seen, I agree with anybody who says that this is the best HackerCon in the world. And I've worked at cons, I've helped organize, I run at DEF CON, and people here at the Congress know what they're doing. And it's a great time. Yeah. Well, just one, the size and people management. The fact that I didn't see big, gigantic lines for talks here. All the talks were high quality. The speakers showed up. Things run relatively on time. The network works. It's a beautiful space. People here are very friendly and polite to outsiders. You know, I mean, I'm in a foreign country speaking my native language. You know, if you came to the United States and tried to speak German, it wouldn't work so well. and it's many, many different small things like that that add up to what I think is a very professionally run HackerCon. I mean, I could go on more if you want, but I'd probably end up using all my time. And that, you know, for all of the things taken combined, CCC has a defined altruistic motive. And so these are the reasons why I think that a fund could be created for CCC. And if you have a project out there that fits these aims, even if you're in Germany or even if you're somewhere in Europe, but you have people who would be willing to donate in the United States, please come talk to me, because I'm sure that something could be worked out. I mean, yeah, there are many different legal details, there are different financial details, there's laws and things like that that we have to go through, but that's why the Hacker Foundation exists. We did that work so that you don't have to. Just to sort of wrap things up, because I wanted to allow for a lot of time for Q&A, the reason I was into this is because I thought that there was a big need in the community to have somebody who is able to deal with that sort of middle ground, that fiduciary role for hackers that aren't at a university anymore, or that can't get grant funding because they don't have somebody to administer the grant funding. And then part of the process that we do is stripping down all of the legal headaches that you would have to go through if you were to roll your own 501c3 or roll your own charitable organization in the United States somehow. We've already worked through all the tough questions, and we know how to ask it in a much simpler way. We have hacked the tax code for you. And it's a way for you to, if you have a project that would be an eligible 501c3, instead of having to make you wait 2 years and pay $1,000 in application fees, we've done it. We can create things like this for you for free, for nothing. That's why we're here. Again, HF has been around for a while, and admittedly, we haven't done a whole lot. And I'm openly admitting that right now, and I think we need to do a better job of reaching out. That when we started this, we thought the community was just going to have a line around the block coming to us, talking about these things. But that didn't happen. I mean, this room's barely 20% full. So HF does need to do a much better job of outreach and trying to talk to the community and say, hey, you can do these things. You don't have to be working on your code until 3 o'clock in the morning, sleeping for 3 hours and then going to work. That there's a better way to do this if that's what you really want to do. If your stated aim is working on open source development, not doing it for some kind of profit motive because your boss wants you to, we can try to help with that. Another thing I think the Hacker Foundation needs to do better, and one of the reasons I'm here, is we need to be better prepared for conferences. We need to have better things set up. I mean, right now, I'm just saying, please, come talk to me, tell me about your project, let me see if there's something that the Hacker Foundation can do for you. And, you know, I have yet to see how well that's going to work. I've talked to a couple of people here at Con and explained the idea, and people say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And I say, okay, well, what do you do? And it's like, oh, well, I don't see how anything I could do could help. I'm trying to find the people here at, you know, the largest hacker conference in the world who might want to be able to do something and how we can help them. I've said this a million times, any ideas, suggestions, possibilities, no matter how off the wall they might seem, please come talk to me, pick up one of my business cards. Our website is, easily enough, hackerfoundation.org. I know it's not the best website in the world. That's another ongoing political conversation. For any of you who've done that. I just did the tax stuff. I was not responsible for the website. I do a lot of work just in my role as treasurer. I don't have time to take that on myself, even though I've tried a couple of times. And, you know, one thing that I haven't really hit on so much, if you have people who are sitting on a big pile of money and don't know what to do with it, or even if you have something that you can donate and you say, well, I've wanted to give money to the community, but, you know, I don't want it to go to one particular project or another. I just want it to sort of be spread around to many different projects. Come talk to us because we need money just like any other charitable organization out there. Sort of like instead of donating to United Way, donate to the Hacker Foundation. It'll get to people that you actually probably want it to. And so now it's time for Q&A. I just wanted to try to foster as open a discussion as possible. The original vision for this talk, when we were first talking with McFly about it at DEF CON, was sort of a hacker panel on what is the scene like in the United States. I lived in San Francisco right after the .com bubble. I was working for a computer recycler, moved down to Los Angeles. I grew up in the Midwest and have lived there, and I've spent a decent amount of time with NYC 2600. I have a pretty broad experience and a sociological take on hacker communities in the United States. So if you have questions on that, please come talk to me. I'll leave my business card right here, right after I wrap things up and start Q&A. I'm going to be here in Berlin until very early in the morning on New Year's Day. So I'll be here after the Congress if you want to talk. Here's my contact information. The first number is my mobile here in Germany. I'm also on DECT, but that phone is currently charging and needs another 2 or 3 hours to charge in the speaker room. But I have that. Or afterwards, my email address is nf@hackerfoundation.org, and that's my phone number right there. And I'm just going to leave this slide up during Q&A in case you want to write that down. Everything except my contact information in Germany is on the business cards, which I'll leave right here. So with that, are there any questions? Yes. Bits of information about every single tag in the system, about every of the 10 million tags in the system, which already saw was a surprising result. So this is not assuming that an attacker can pick the optimal text to break. We also simulated the case where right here, if you want to grab dinner, that secret's assigned that is breaking, and you see that these results fall very close, typically within
this is no sound. Why did you went? Why did you go for a structure that cannot do anything political? What you want to do is highly political, and what is it exactly that you cannot do?
I also want to preface this. I'm not an attorney, so anything that is construed as legal advice here should not be taken as that. This is a standard disclaimer which I have to give in the United States, and I do by habit out here. So anytime I'm talking about the law, remember that I'm not an attorney. I'm in training to become a chartered accountant equivalent in the United States. But having said that, 501c3s are, by the letter of the law, not allowed to engage in political activity that's directly sponsoring a candidate for office or directly attempting to influence pending legislation in the United States. And of course, the other things like we can't advocate for the violent overthrow of the United States government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like you said, yes, a lot of the projects that we have and are working on could be taken as having a political bent. But in the United States, the way things work out is even if a project in prima facie has some sort of political aspect to it, as long as the project is not directly attempting to influence legislation or legislators, it's okay. So you can say as a 501c3, you can support a project which, as a side note, not as their primary aim, says things like the Patriot Act is taking away our freedoms, we need to fight to get our rights back in the United States, but they can't say, okay, paragraph 101A of the Patriot Act needs to be redacted, and we're going to call our senators and congressmen and urge you to call them, and we're going to donate money to candidates. We can't do that. But in more general terms, things that are political or classically known in Europe to be sort of political activities by their very nature are, with some exceptions, generally okay in the United States. But as I said earlier, the stated aim of the Hacker Foundation is not to engage in direct political action. Anybody who wants to engage in direct political action but doesn't have the technical wherewithal to do it, we will help. But by the same token, being a 501c3, we can't say, if a group of Bush supporters comes to us and say, we want to have a website to support our ideas, we can't say no to them and at the same time say yes to somebody who says, well, I want to run a website that says why George Bush is the worst president in the history of the United States. What our aim is more to provide the technological tools that come naturally to our community to other communities who need them. And we can't turn away anybody based on their political views. Down here.
So on your very first slide, you said your expenses were not refunded by coming here. So the CCC, you came in for free, but no other expenses are refunded. Mm-hmm. If you think you deserve it because you can't pay your expenses yourself, you can come to the German Hacker Foundation, the Valholland Stiftung. We refund speakers actually from coming aboard which can't pay for their own expenses. So if you think you apply, you're welcome. And the second thing is, I don't want to be impolite, and probably you answered it already. But what's behind supporting projects in Africa, which is probably fine, or somewhere else, if so many things are worse at the place where you live? So it can't be that everything is politically that you can't do it because it's politics, but you should take probably more care of what's going on in your own country before going somewhere else.
Well, and that's a perfect example of something that is a point that I don't think was illustrated clearly in the Hacker Foundation. Is we try not to initiate things. That one of the things that we wanted to do is be a base for hackers to come to us and do things. We don't try to go out there or tell hackers how to do something. A hacker came to us, he grew up in East Africa, he has strong family roots there, he has strong cultural roots there, and he thought, and that it was more important for him to go out, take laptops to East Africa, and do things there. That just happened to be who came to us, and we helped facilitate that. If somebody in our community comes to us and says, I want to do things here, right at home, and I will work at this, and this is my passion, I'll do that. But I think it would be bad for us to tell anybody, especially to tell a community as diverse, with as many politically diverse views as this community, and even more so in the United States, that sort of hackers in Europe tend to be more left-leaning. Hackers in the United States, from my experience, have been pretty divided into right and left camps. I mean, a lot of people accuse LA 2600 of being a bunch of right-wing gun nuts, and to a certain extent, they're right. Which is why I said we can't alienate certain parts of the community by taking a stand saying, well, no, we need to do things at home to help people there. If people come to us and that's what we want to do, we will do everything we can to facilitate that. But In this particular case, it was somebody who had a very strong passion to go to East Africa. And so that's what we were doing. We were responding to somebody coming to us from the community. Does that sort of answer the point? Okay. Okay, yeah, exactly. I think, was there a question over here? Oh, okay.
I have a quick question. Can you give us some numbers about your endowment or your annual budget, just to give us an idea how huge your organization is? Because I've said nothing about numbers so far.
Okay, well, that's a good question. The Hacker Foundation is sitting on, depending on how the assets are valued, and that's the thing, most of what Hacker Foundation has is assets, not cash. We have, well, first of all, our annual operating budget is technically by American accounting rules 0. We have no overhead expense. Everything that we do for the Hacker Foundation is just basically donated in kind. I mean, I'm providing the professional expertise that I have to the Hacker Foundation for free. All of the directors meet for free. They take things out of their own time. The paper receipts that I print for people, I just print out of an office machine. And since it's so low, I don't even bother to write it off on my taxes. That we, you know, other charitable organizations will say, well, we take 10% because we have to cover office and overhead and things like that. The Hacker Foundation is 0 right now. And that may have to change depending on the scope of the organizations. But I'd say we're sitting on anywhere between, you know, $30,000 and $100,000 in assets, depending on how you look at it. And I mean, and in theory, some of the stuff that might have value to us actually has no value. That depending on what state you're in, it might have a negative value because you have to pay to have it be responsibly recycled. And I have to say again that that's not the official stated on our books sort of thing right now. That's something that I don't even know if I have the technical liberty to discuss in the detail that I think you're looking for. But that's a rough approximation. And the other thing is that a lot of something like the Metasploit Fund, where if we got $20,000 in donations for the Metasploit Fund, that's something that we carry for the Metasploit Fund. That's not Hacker Foundation money. That's something where if the Metasploit has a financial need, they tap it. If they don't, they don't, and it just sits in a bank account collecting interest.
Hello. I like your initiative, but and I like the fact you think Chaos Computer Club is a really good organization. I'm not a member of the Chaos, but one of the reasons I share this idea is because the Chaos can influence legislation. Because not only by lobbying, but by educate politicians. Some, if I don't make mistake, several times in Germany, they influence legislation by showing problem to politicians and try to educate politicians on government representative. And I think it's important today to make a bridge between hackers and politicians to show them the problem, because politicians are only in contact with consultants or companies. We are wood-tongued and don't show the problem, don't show hidden problem, whatever. So it's one of the reasons of the, wow, I think it's one of the reasons of the Chaos Contemporary Club efficiency. But anyway, I think still think it's a good initiative. And what are your contact with Internet Society, for instance?
Could you repeat the last part of your question? I'm sorry.
What are you contact? Are you in contact with Internet Society in US, for instance? ISOC?
No.
No. Okay.
No, and the board of directors, I may not personally agree with this, but the board of directors of the Hacker Foundation has said that the kind of political activism that you're talking about, educating legislators, building that sort of thing, is better handled by the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And one of the things that we made a conscious decision on was to not interfere with something that is more the domain of the EFF in the United States, that we don't want to try to duplicate their efforts because they do a very good job at what they do. I mean, arguably it might not be as good of a job as people think, but it's a Herculean task in the United States, and I have a lot of respect for EFF, and everybody on HF has a lot of respect for EFF. What we were more interested in doing was the more on-the-ground education, things that you were talking about. And while I do agree there is a need to educate politicians, that they tend to be very ignorant on these issues, and if they were fully aware of the truth and the impact of it, would have a different opinion, but that's not something that we engage in. But we fully support the EFF, who is more in line with that sort of the second part of what you were asking. Okay. Yep.
So you said that you're looking for people to make donations to the Hacker Foundation. I was wondering if at cons such as this one or at DEF CON, do you run any smaller scale donations or fundraising events for the Hacker Foundation? And if so, what sort of fundraising events do you
Next
do?
question, please.
Yeah, it's a little bit in the same. I'm interested in how you come to donate this, how you contact them, and what's the approach. You go with a special project, for example. Somebody wants money for this project, and you go with this project to the possible donator to collect money, or how you get to the donators, and what's your success approach for this?
The success varies on the project, and usually projects that come to us have a donor in mind. That usually they already have somebody who they thought might be in line. With what happened with the North Boys and Girls Club in Chicago is they had a need. They had former corporate sponsorship, and what we try to do is not so much sort of the more formal contact of writing letters or contacting people, but using existing social networks within the board of directors and within Chicago 2600, and having people who knew people who are willing to do things on a much more personal level. That most of our contacts that way are just knowing other people in the scene who might have access to something or might have something sitting in a closet somewhere that they just need to get rid of that would be of use to that. And I think we've had varied success on that depending on the project. I mean, Metasploit project in comparison is just an open pitch. It's a donation button only. You get a letter from us saying, you know, you donated $100, you can write this off on your US tax obligation. Okay. Yes. And then
wouldn't you agree that the electronic voting issue could be a major project which would be across political borders?
yes. And that's something that I think is, I personally believe it's very well covered in the US, and I think that anything that Hacker Foundation would get involved in, just the risk of putting our charitable status at stake with that, because it's so closely connected to pending legislation and pending problems in the United States, that there's a recent law passed called the Help America Vote Act that, depending on how you see it, might have hurt things even more than that. It could be a good project, but I think that there are a lot of people who are very talented in the community in the United States who are working on it. I don't think there are enough, but because it's a political issue that's so close to the no-go zone for the Hacker Foundation that, you know, we've unofficially made a conscious decision to sort of stray away from that because it is so politically charged and that it puts our 501c3 status at risk. Another thing I haven't sort of gotten into is that a lot of charities that engage in political activism sort of outside of their license, so to speak, from the United States government, have been called on it and have had their charitable status close to being revoked. And that I don't think I have to explain that the current administration tends to not play so nice or by the long-established rules. And so that just sort of to protect what our stated aim was, we tend to shy away from things like that. And I do think that blackboxvoting.org and other groups are working very well on that, and that there is coverage there, and that they're doing it. You had a follow-up?
Those charities which lost their status, were there already court decisions about that?
Whether or not a charity has status doesn't technically follow, and again, I'm not a lawyer. It's not law it's law that starts administratively within the IRS, that an administrator at the IRS can say, you've done this bad thing, we're taking away your status. And they can just do that. And they have to go to court, and it's a very expensive and very long process, and they have to sue the IRS to get their status back, and that there are many, many different layers that make it hard to do. It's a process that's well outside of the standard tort system in the United States. And I think I've been, yeah. Okay.
But first, let's try to decode the signal that is sent to see whether
Okay.
So you described that you have this funding for Metasploit, which is basically, if I understand it right, it's basically a development project, right? It's mostly about software, or is it more about operating servers? I don't know. So I wonder, probably not how much money goes to that project, but what is this money being spent on actually within the project? And are there any guidelines you have or have established or that simply exist as a de facto rule what the projects could spend their money on?
And this was part of the negotiation process of setting things up, and when they came to us and applied for us, we said that if you have equipment donations, I mean, they have to decide to accept them, but equipment donations are basically used to further development of Metasploit, for them to give to developers to work with. Their cash monies can also be used to buy equipment and facilitate networking on the project. That if they raise enough money, they can all get together and have sort of a 2 or 3 day hackfest on that. That's basically all they can spend money on.
So it's
in the way we've negotiated it with them.
Okay, so it's basically equipment and doing like travel expenses and then conferences and that kind of stuff. Is there anything more you can envision that might be like, I don't know, I've been thinking about getting, well, some projects need some kind of, well, every project needs some kind of sustainability, but many projects depend on a certain lead developer that really loves to put more energy into it and really be the center for everybody else to contribute, but maybe this lead developer has no way of like getting enough money for his living. So what about supporting a lead developer and get him into some kind of, him or her, to some kind of employment using these funds? Is this something you would support?
Yes, and granted, that's a big legal issue that they haven't asked us to tackle yet. But I could easily see funds like that for a project subsidizing the lead workers, so that, or the project lead, so that they didn't have to spend so much time at work. And that happens, and that has to happen because of certain laws regarding charities and things like that, and spending limits and the technical details. How it's done has to be done very carefully, and that when we approach that if that's a need, they haven't asked for it yet. If there's a project that comes to us that has the financial wherewithal to do that, I would strongly support that, and I believe there is a way to do it. I know other 501c3s do that, but right now the Hacker Foundation doesn't have any employees, and that's a very sticky term in the United States tax law, just like it is here, I'm sure, in the European Union.
I wasn't really talking about employee status as such, but getting regular money, at least something to make people, to encourage lead developers to spend more time on the project, which would be.
And it's one of those things where I could easily see it, and I think what we have worked out is for the internet bill for the lead developer could be paid for out of Metasploit funds. A portion of his house that he uses for development, if he pays rent or pays a mortgage, could easily be used for that. And that they would basically send those bills to us and we would pay them. That there are a lot of, the rules in, like I said, writing checks out to people individually are very sticky in the United States, but something like that I think falls in line with one of the core reasons of what I wanted to do in the United States.
I'm just wondering, I'm trying to figure out in terms of your organization, whether you're more within a vacuum in terms of disconnected, or whether you're more engaged within community in the sense that software technology law and such, and the law and various other things are becoming far more integrated. It's no longer this sort of lawless space of frontier land. And so my question is, in terms of the US situation right now, there's been some major developments, as I understand it, this summer, for instance, in terms of Washington and EFF and EPIC. And I'm just wondering, does your organization follow that closely? We do, and I don't want to say that we follow it as organization-stated policy, but all of our board of directors, I mean, Jake Applebaum
as a director, has been very involved in a lot of those kinds of issues, and Jennifer Granick's been involved in a lot of those issues, and personally, as individuals in the community, we're very connected with those things. And like I said, because of the political considerations in the tax law, the foundation as a foundation tends to shy away from things that are directly political like that, but we all follow it. You know, we all read the news and we all stay involved in that because we're involved in the community and it's things that are important to us.
Well, earlier, as I heard it, you said that you were deferring to the EFF to take up the legal challenges and you were trying to focus more on the technical things?
More on the technical things and more on community and charity and the groundwork.
And
sort of thing.
I'm just trying to understand if there was a situation, say, where, you know, there was a major issue where the EFF had problems, or EPIC, or various other organizations that were looking at that legal issues, would you be potentially one of the organizations waiting in the wings?
Yes, if they ask for that, we will gladly do that. That if they have, just this an example just came to me as you were talking, but if they came and asked us and they said, you know, like, we're really good at reaching people in San Francisco. We're really good at reaching people in New York. People in Grand Rapids don't have a clue. Could you fix that? We can, as a part of education, set up forums to help educate people who aren't in the major urban centers or who may not have as strong a political connection to those things, to just educate them on the issues in an apolitical way, to basically give them the tools enough to find out more and to find out how those issues connect with them directly.
Can I make a suggestion then?
Please.
Okay, so right now, censorship, privacy, various other intrusions, retention law, all of those things right now are sort of centering around sort of issues like terrorism and child pornography. Those are the key terms. On the other end of this spectrum, though, there's the women and children issue. That's the counterbalance. And there's organizations that are struggling in the States who are trying to protect women and children, women who are being stalked by people, domestic violence, and then children whose personal information can potentially be sold. And so, to my mind, that's a tremendous counterbalance for the situation in the States. And I know that they need help. And they're a tiny, tiny organization, but just something to think about.
Okay. No, thank you very much for that.
Hi.
Hey, Jen.
How much time do we have left?
5 minutes, according to that guy right there.
Okay, sweet. So I just want to clarify the Hacker Foundation's role within the community. I think that there's been some mistake of comparing it with an organization like CCC, and I think that it's a different organization than that. That's my question, basically. Would it be fair to say that it's sort of a meta project handler, that when you have a project, like an organization like the CCC, I want to have conferences or I want to do this, they could come to the Hacker Foundation for support, right? Let me clarify. Let me make an example here. I think when I first moved to Berlin a couple of weeks ago, basically, everyone here warned me that the bureaucracy would be terrible, that you had this rumor of German bureaucracy. And from my experience, American bureaucracy trumps it absolutely completely. And when you sit down and you have a project, I want to do something, a lot of times the first question is, well, okay, I'm going to need to set up a nonprofit organization, or what do I need to do? And I think a lot of projects just stop there, you know, and they can't continue because writing a grant is like a 3-year process. Because setting up a nonprofit organization is at least 6 months, right? Because a friend of mine tried to get a radio station license. That application took 2 years, right? So an organization that helps you handle the taxes and the legal business lets you do your own political things, lets you do your own hacker things. And so it's like a, boy, I'm really bad at this today.
You actually slept, I didn't.
Would it be fair to say that it's a project handler of sorts? And so, right.
No, it is, but again, and a point I don't think I emphasized clearly enough is that we are what the community wants us to be within, of course, the certain guidelines that I've talked about. I established this because people in the community asked us to. I said, okay, we're here. People, and that's the thing. What happens is people come to us with a good idea, and we get things ready and rolling, and then the ball becomes too heavy and drops.
Right.
But I mean, the reason we're here is to handle a lot of that so that you don't have to do what we're here to help you do what you want to do, how you want to do it. I mean, because a lot of the organizations that sort of do what we do ask you to take a political stance. They ask you to take on certain things. They ask you to give up a little bit of your independence. All we say is, because of the law, you have to meet these criteria. We will help you meet them. We will help you define things to help you meet them, help you maintain your independence, and help you do a lot of this complicated administrative work so that you don't have to waste time on that and you can spend time on what your passion is.
Right. So the Hacker Foundation asks 2 questions. One, what is your project? Do you need money? Can we help you apply for this? Can we help you with your legal questions and set up so that you can do your project? And do you want to give money to projects? Because we have a way to let you legally do that.
Right.
Okay, my second question, real fast, as an accountant or accountant-to-be, does that mean that all of the money that I would normally pay to the U.S. government in taxes, I can just give to you instead?
I can't answer that question, but the short answer is not really.
Okay, but
thanks to Katrina, though, you can donate a lot more than you used to be able to directly to an organization instead of paying it to the government.
That's great.
So, I mean, are there any U.S. taxpayers in here aside from me? Okay. No. All right, thank you very much. It's been great. Thank you again.